The 1980s gave us teen comedies filled with moles, mixtapes, and more questionable life lessons than any guidance counselor could handle. These movies felt like secret handbooks to adolescents, but time hasn't been kind to them. What once looked hilarious now feels chaotic, cringeworthy, or just plain cursed. Before the imitators came flooding in, one film captured teenage awkwardness so bluntly it became the blueprint for the rest. Fast Times at Ridgemont High tells the story of teenagers at a Southern California high school stumbling through sex, love, and the general awkwardness of adolescence. Stacey Hamilton, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, experiments with older men while her shy friend Mark Ratner can barely muster the courage to hold her hand, and at the same time Jeff Spicoli, the stoner surfer Sean Penn, turned into a generational mascot, drifts through every scene with a haze of totally awesome. The film sells itself as a teen comedy but slips in weightier beats, like Stacey's quietly handled abortion, or the locker room fantasy that immortalized Phoebe Cates, stepping out of a pool in slow motion, a moment that went on to define how 80s cinema packaged teenage desire. The film's realism came from Cameron Crowe, who had gone undercover in a real high school to gather stories for the book it's based on, which explains why the humor always feels rooted in truth. On set, Penn refused to answer to his real name, asking everyone to call him Spicoli, and even ordered pizza during a scene, a stunt that ended up on film. Judge Reinhold later admitted that filming his humiliating bathroom fantasy was the single most awkward day of his career. What survives decades later is not just a comedy, but the way the film captured adolescence without polish, equal parts funny, painful, and uncomfortably honest. Adventures in Babysitting starts with Chris Parker, played by Elizabeth Shue, expecting a quiet night of movies and popcorn, only to get dragged into one of the wildest nights in Chicago when her best friend calls for help from a downtown bus station. What follows is a series of escalating disasters: a flat tire on the freeway, a run-in with car thieves, a subway gang fight, and the unforgettable scene where Chris and the kids end up on stage in a blues club, forced to sing their way out because Albert Collins won't let anyone leave without performing. Shue later said this was one of her favorite roles because it gave her the chance to play a lead who was both brave and vulnerable at a time when teen comedies often sidelined their female characters. The Blues Club scene was shot live with real Chicago locals, which gave it an unplanned electricity, though Collins himself struggled with lip-syncing and had to be coaxed through multiple takes. And the train fight, where Keith Coogan's character Brad takes a knife to the foot, was actually filmed in reverse, a safety trick that turned clumsy stage choreography into a tense, believable moment. The film was marketed as a light teen comedy, but it worked because it played like an urban odyssey, with Shue at the center holding everything together. Spring Break throws two sets of college guys together in a cheap Fort Lauderdale hotel where every hallway feels like a party and every night ends in chaos. Nelson and Adam show up as shy outsiders but quickly fall under the spell of two confident roommates who drag them into beach contests, hookups, and endless neon nights. The real conflict comes from Nelson's stepfather, Ernest, a controlling politician who sends hired goons to drag him back into line, only to spark a full-blown hotel riot as hundreds of drunk spring breakers fight for their turf. The movie looks reckless because it was director Sean Cunningham encouraged a real party atmosphere, and cast and extras often blurred the line between acting and simply living it up in front of the cameras. But the strangest legacy of the film came from Tammy Lynn Lepper, a young actress who appeared briefly in a bikini boxing contest and later vanished under chilling circumstances. After filming, she became paranoid that someone was trying to kill her, walked away from a role in Scarface, and was last seen barefoot on the side of a Florida road. She was never found. What was filmed as carefree comedy became linked to one of Hollywood's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Porky's follows a group of Florida high school boys who set out to lose their virginity and instead find themselves humiliated by Porky, the crooked owner of a sleazy strip club backed by his sheriff brother. After being cheated and dumped in a swamp, they plot revenge and eventually tear the place to pieces in a drunken rampage. The movie is infamous for its locker room subplot, especially the Bob Brooker lineup, where a furious gym teacher demands a police lineup to identify a boy by his anatomy. Studio executives begged director Bob Clark to cut the scene, calling it too outrageous, but he refused, and it became one of the most quoted comedy moments of its time. Clark said he based the movie on his own teenage years in Florida, which gave its crude humor a strangely nostalgic edge, and the authenticity helped it land with audiences. Critics called it trash, but test screenings drew such wild laughter that Fox reversed course, releasing what they thought would flop only to watch it gross over $100 million. What seemed like a throwaway teen comedy ended up rewriting the rules for raunch, setting the stage for an entire wave of sex comedies. Weird Science tells the story of Gary and Wyatt, two socially awkward teenagers who create the perfect woman on their computer, only to watch her come to life as Lisa, a magical, impossibly confident figure who upends their world. She takes them from bullied nobodies to the center of wild parties and teaches them how to stop hiding behind their insecurities. The movie became a cult classic because it blended John Hughes' love for teenage angst with fantasy chaos, complete with bras-on head-hacking rituals and mutant bikers crashing suburban living rooms. Behind a camera, Hughes cast Kelly LeBrock after she agreed to the part almost on instinct, later saying she wanted Lisa to be less of a fantasy object and more of a powerful figure who flipped control away from the boys. On set, Sean Penn's future Avengers co-star Robert Downey Jr. made his presence known as a teenage troublemaker, pulling pranks with co-star Robert Russler and nearly getting himself fired after trashing hotel rooms. And in the finale, Bill Paxton's Chet is transformed into a grotesque pile of slime, a scene that required him to wear a suffocating rubber suit, so claustrophobic he nearly panicked inside it. The film was marketed as comedy, but the behind-the-scenes chaos was just as legendary as what ended up on screen. Revenge of the Nerds follows two friends, Lewis and Gilbert, who get tossed out of their freshman dorms after the jocks burn down their own frat house, forcing them and their fellow misfits to live in the gym until they form their own fraternity. What begins as a simple underdog story becomes a battle for respect, complete with talent shows, pranks, and a belching contest that rattles windows. The movie sold itself as dumb fun, but the production itself was more of a party than anyone expected. Filmed at the University of Arizona, the administration worried about how Greek life would look on screen, but the set quickly devolved into what the cast later called an actual fraternity, with beer, pizza, and pranks bleeding into everyday filming. Some of the funniest moments weren't scripted at all, like Booger's strange card trick, which was improvised and left everyone laughing too hard to call cut. The legendary belch came from sound designers who layered animal noises, including, according to one rumor, a camel, because Curtis Armstrong couldn't belch on command. Years later, the Nerds' fictional fraternity from Revenge of the Nerds became a real one at the University of Connecticut. Proof that sometimes the punchlines outlive the movie itself, slipping off the screen and into campus life. The Last American Virgin looks like a typical teen sex comedy at first, with three friends chasing girls, making mistakes, and delivering pizzas. But what sets it apart is how cruelly real it becomes. Gary falls in love with Karen, only to watch her pick his best friend Rick, then stand by her when Rick abandons her after a pregnancy scare. Gary pays for her abortion, cares for her through recovery, and finally confesses his love, only to see her back with Rick at her birthday party. The film ends with Gary walking away alone, devastated, a moment that shocked audiences who had been primed for the usual goofy, happy ending. Director Boaz Davidson refused to change it because it was his own story, pulled straight from his teenage years, and that honesty is what made it unforgettable. Diane Franklin, who played Karen, later said the infamous Pop the Cherry scene was emotionally brutal to film, but the cast and crew treated it with surprising care for a genre that usually went for cheap laughs. Even the abortion sequence was shot without glamour or comedy, played raw and serious, something no one expected in a teen movie. It is that refusal to sugarcoat heartbreak that gave the film its cult status, remembered less for its raunch and more for its honesty. Valley Girl tells the story of Julie, a fashionable teenager living in the safety of the San Fernando Valley, who unexpectedly falls for Randy, a rebellious punk from the other side of Los Angeles. Their relationship becomes a tug-of-war between her comfortable suburban life and the pull of something wilder, with disapproving friends, flashy mall parties, and late-night drives through gritty downtown streets, setting the stage for a modern Romeo and Juliet. What could have been just another disposable teen romance became something else entirely, thanks to Nicolas Cage, who brought a raw intensity to Randy that the director spotted instantly during his audition, casting him even though he was still relatively unknown. The soundtrack, handpicked by Martha Coolidge herself, became nearly as famous as the movie, filled with new wave and punk tracks that mirrored the cultural clash at the heart of the story. Deborah Foreman, who played Julie, was a real Valley girl, but she had to tone down her accent to avoid parody, and her natural charisma helped carry the film. Even the beach party scenes shot on Malibu's coastline became iconic for the way they contrasted the shiny Valley world with Randy's rougher edge. Low-budget, fast-shoot, improvised lines from Cage that made it into the final cut. Everything about the film felt scrappy, but that scrappiness gave it the authenticity that kept it alive as a cult classic long after its release. Hard Bodies follows Scotty Palmer, a smooth-talking young hustler who finds himself evicted and winds up living with three middle-aged divorcees desperate to recapture their youth. They pay Scotty to teach them his secrets for meeting women, which he sums up in his shallow but effective mantra, the bigger, better deal. Soon the men are reinventing themselves as beachside Romeos, throwing wild parties and fumbling their way through aerobics classes and late-night hookups until Scotty's own relationship with his girlfriend Christy forces him to question whether empty flirting can really be enough. The film leaned heavily into outrageous spectacle, with real Malibu beachgoers recruited as extras, many of them already half drunk, which gave the shoot a barely controlled energy. Roger Corman, legendary king of low-budget cinema, helped finance the movie, and his reputation for fast and cheap production kept the cast on their toes. One of the strangest quirks of the film was the casting of the all-female glam metal band Vixen, who appeared on screen as Diaper Rash years before they broke into mainstream rock. Hard Bodies was originally meant for the Playboy Channel, but got rejected for being too tame, only to end up with a theatrical release. What was meant to be a throwaway beach comedy became a late-night VHS staple, remembered today as a loud, sunburned snapshot of 1980s party culture at its most unfiltered.